In a world that constantly demands our attention, our time, our energy, have you ever felt the profound exhaustion of being perpetually available? That unspoken expectation to always respond, always say yes, always be there for everyone else, often at the expense of your own inner world. It's a subtle erosion of the self, a life lived on others' terms. But what if the key to profound personal transformation, to reclaiming your very essence, lies in a seemingly counterintuitive act, withdrawing that constant availability? What if, by strategically stepping back, you could unlock a deeper, more authentic way of being? Carl Jung, one of the most influential thinkers in modern psychology, offered profound insights into the human psyche that illuminate precisely why this shift can be so powerful. He once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." This journey of becoming, what Jung termed individuation, often requires us to challenge the masks we wear and the roles we play, especially the role of the ever-available individual. Throughout this exploration, we will delve into Jung's wisdom to understand how the persona, our social mask, can trap us in a cycle of people-pleasing. We'll uncover the shadow aspects that fuel this need for constant validation and explore how setting boundaries isn't an act of selfishness, but a crucial step towards authentic connection and inner wholeness, a kind of psychological alchemy. Jung's work suggests that true connection, both with ourselves and others, often blossoms not from relentless accessibility, but from a place of centered self-possession. Are you ready to explore how stepping back from the world's constant demands might in fact bring you closer to your true self and fundamentally change everything? Carl Jung introduced the concept of the persona, a term derived from the Latin word for an actor's mask. For Jung, the persona is the social face we present to the world. He described it as a compromise between individual and society as to what a man should appear to be. It's the role we play, the impression we want to make, the way we adapt to societal expectations and navigate our daily interactions. In itself, the persona isn't inherently negative. It's a necessary tool for functioning in society. However, the challenge arises when we over-identify with this mask, when the persona of, say, the always helpful friend or the ever-reliable colleague becomes not just a role we play, but who we believe we are in totality. This is where the mask of constant availability takes its hold. We might adopt this persona because it brings approval, avoids conflict, or perhaps it's a role we learned early in life was necessary for acceptance. The always available persona whispers that our value is tied to our utility to others. But what is the psychological toll of wearing this mask too tightly for too long? Jung was clear that the persona is not the whole self. He stated in his collected works, the persona is a semblance, a two-dimensional reality. When we live solely through this semblance, we risk profound disconnection from our deeper, authentic self. Imagine, for instance, a woman named Sarah, who has built her identity around being the go-to person for her friends, family, and even colleagues. She's always the first to volunteer, the last to leave, the one who answers messages at all hours. Externally, she is lauded as indispensable, caring, and incredibly reliable. Internally, however, Sarah feels a growing emptiness, a persistent fatigue that no amount of sleep can cure, and a subtle resentment that simmers beneath the surface. Her own hobbies are neglected, her personal goals deferred, her inner voice increasingly faint. This persona of constant availability, while perhaps initially adopted for connection or validation, has become a gilded cage. The energy required to maintain this front, to always be on, depletes the psychic reserves needed for genuine self-reflection, for attending to her own soul's calling. This is the heavy price of an over-identified persona, a creeping inauthenticity, a quiet despair born from the neglect of the true self. Jung warned that if we are nothing but the role we play, we lose ourselves. Have you ever paused to consider which aspects of your availability are a conscious, joyful offering, and which might be a performance dictated by a persona that no longer truly serves you, or perhaps never did? If the persona is the mask we present to the world, then Carl Jung's concept of individuation is the lifelong, courageous journey of discovering the unique, authentic face beneath that mask. For Jung, individuation is the central process of human development, the path to becoming a psychological individual, a separate, indivisible unity, a whole. He described it as the process by which a human being becomes what he or she is destined to be. It's about differentiating oneself from the collective consciousness, from societal expectations, and even from the very roles, like constant availability, that our persona might dictate. This isn't a journey towards isolation, but towards a more genuine and conscious relationship with oneself and consequently with the world. So, how does withdrawing our constant availability and setting boundaries relate to this profound journey of individuation? They are not just related. Setting boundaries is an essential, practical act of individuation. When you begin to say no to demands that drain your energy or pull you away from your inner center, when you consciously choose where to invest your time and presence, you are actively defining yourself. You are stating implicitly and explicitly, "This is where I end, and this is where another begins. These are my needs, my limits, my priorities." Jung saw this differentiation as crucial. In his work, Psychological Types, he emphasized the importance of developing individual distinctiveness. Setting boundaries is the very act of carving out the psychological space necessary for the true self to breathe, to be heard, and to emerge. Consider the common struggle of being available 24/7 via technology, answering every email immediately, responding to every message instantly. This can feel like diligence, but from a Jungian perspective, it can also be a flight from the self, a way to avoid the sometimes uncomfortable quiet of our own inner world. When you decide, for instance, to not check emails after a certain hour, or to dedicate specific times for deep work without interruption, you are setting a boundary. This reclaimed time and mental space become the fertile ground for introspection, for listening to your own thoughts and feelings, for engaging with those parts of yourself that get drowned out by the constant noise of external demands. It is in these moments of intentional unavailability to the outer world that we become more available to our inner world. Jung believed that your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. Setting boundaries helps us to look inside. It's a courageous step towards self-possession, a declaration that your inner life has value and deserves protection and cultivation. What small, almost imperceptible boundary could you draw today, not to push others away, but to draw yourself closer to your own unfolding individuation? Now let's venture into one of Carl Jung's most profound and often misunderstood concepts, the shadow. For Jung, the shadow represents the dark side of our personality, comprising all those aspects of ourselves that we deny, repress, or deem unacceptable, both to society and to our own conscious ego. Jung stated in Psychology and Religion, everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. It's crucial to understand that the shadow isn't inherently evil. It simply consists of those parts of us that have been relegated to the unconscious, often because they didn't fit with our persona or the expectations placed upon us. How does this relate to the pattern of constant availability and people-pleasing? Often the relentless drive to be available, to please others at all costs, is deeply rooted in these unacknowledged shadow aspects. Perhaps in our shadow lies a profound fear of rejection, a fear of not being loved or accepted if we aren't perpetually useful. Or maybe it's a hidden desire for control, where being indispensable gives us a sense of power or importance. It could even be repressed anger or resentment that we dare not express directly, so it manifests as an overcompensatory niceness. Jung believed that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. The compulsion to be always available when unexamined is often the unconscious shadow directing our lives. Consider someone who, on the surface, is incredibly accommodating, always saying yes to every request, even when it clearly inconveniences them. They might consciously believe they are simply being kind or generous. However, if we were to explore their shadow, we might find a deeply buried childhood experience where expressing their own needs led to disapproval or punishment. Thus, the need to please becomes a survival strategy, a way to avoid the pain of that original rejection. This doesn't make their kindness insincere, but it does mean it's driven by an unhealed wound, a shadow motive. The old people-pleaser might also project their own disowned neediness onto others, constantly anticipating and meeting others' needs, because they cannot bear to acknowledge their own. Jung taught that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. When we find ourselves disproportionately frustrated by others' perceived selfishness, it might be a clue to our own unexpressed needs for self-care residing in the shadow. The work of integrating the shadow involves courageously examining these unconscious roots. Why do I feel this overwhelming need to be liked? What am I truly afraid of if I say no? By bringing these shadow motivations into the light of consciousness, we begin to dismantle their power over us, freeing ourselves to act from a place of genuine choice rather than unconscious compulsion. This is a vital step in transforming the pattern of people-pleasing. Within Jung's intricate map of the psyche, the concepts of the anima and animus represent the unconscious, feminine aspects within a man and the unconscious masculine aspects within a woman, respectively. Jung described these as archetypal figures that mediate between the conscious ego and the deeper layers of the collective unconscious. He posited that a healthy integration of these contrasexual elements is vital for psychological wholeness and mature relating. But how does this relate to our theme of availability and connection? Paradoxically, stepping back from constant availability can create the space for more authentic and balanced connections, partly through a healthier engagement with our anima or animus. When we are perpetually available, especially from a place of people-pleasing or shadow fear, our interactions are often driven by projection. A man overly identified with a hyper-masculine persona might project his unacknowledged anima, his capacity for feeling relatedness and intuition, onto the women in his life, expecting them to carry all the emotional weight. Conversely, a woman stuck in a people-pleasing pattern might project her animus, her capacity for assertiveness, discernment, and independent thought, onto men, becoming overly reliant or submissive. In Aeon Researches into the Phenomenology of the Self, Jung explored how these projections can lead to enmeshed or superficial relationships. We seek in others what we haven't yet owned in ourselves. However, when we choose intentional unavailability, when we create space for ourselves through boundaries, we begin to withdraw these projections. This space allows for introspection, a turning inward where we can start to encounter and integrate our own anima or animus. For a man, this might mean connecting with his own feelings, his intuition, his capacity for nurturing, rather than solely seeking these qualities externally. For a woman, it could involve discovering her own inner strength, her clarity of thought, her ability to stand her ground rather than deferring these to others. As we become more whole, more self-possessed by integrating these inner aspects, the nature of our connections changes. We no longer relate primarily out of neediness or unconscious expectation. Instead, we can meet others from a place of greater authenticity and mutual respect. Imagine a relationship where one partner, previously always available and accommodating, starts to set boundaries and prioritize their own needs. Initially, this might cause friction, but if both individuals are committed to growth, this shift can lead to a profound deepening of the connection. The partner setting boundaries is no longer just a reflection of the other's needs, but is emerging as a more distinct whole individual. This invites the other partner to also relate more authentically, perhaps confronting their own projections. Jung believed that true relationship happens between two whole individuals. By becoming less available in the old enmeshed way, we become more truly available for genuine, conscious connection, where the anima and animus are not just projected, but are integrated aspects of two interacting, individuating selves. Have you noticed how your relationships shift when you are more centered and less driven by an unconscious need to please or be validated? That shift often signals a healthier interplay of these deep psychic structures. Carl Jung was deeply fascinated by the ancient art of alchemy, not for its literal attempts to turn lead into gold, but for its rich symbolic language describing the process of psychological transformation. For Jung, alchemy was a metaphor for the individuation process, the journey of refining the raw, unformed aspects of the psyche into a more integrated and whole self. He saw the alchemical vessel, the crucible, as analogous to the contained space of introspection and solitude necessary for this inner work. In his seminal work, Psychology and Alchemy, Jung wrote, "The opus, the alchemical work, consists of three parts: insight, endurance, and action. Withdrawing our constant availability, choosing solitude, can be seen as creating this alchemical crucible. When we are constantly available, our psychic energy is dispersed outwards, reacting to external stimuli and the demands of others. There's little opportunity for the prima materia, the raw, undifferentiated contents of our unconscious, to be contained, heated and transformed. Solitude, however, not loneliness but chosen, intentional solitude, provides this necessary containment. It's in this inner space, free from the pressure to perform or please, that we can truly encounter ourselves, our shadows, our unfulfilled potentials, our deepest fears, and our most authentic desires. This is the nigredo phase of alchemy, the blackening, where we confront the difficult, often uncomfortable, aspects of our being. It's not easy, but it's essential for transformation. Jung likened this to the alchemical process of solutio, where the old, rigid structures of the personality are dissolved to make way for something new. Consider the artist who retreats to their studio, the writer who seeks quiet contemplation, or simply the individual who carves out regular time for silent reflection, meditation, or journaling. These are modern-day alchemists creating their crucibles. In these periods of chosen unavailability to the outer world, they are deeply available to the inner. It's here that insights can emerge, like the albedo or whitening phase, where clarity begins to dawn after the confrontation with the shadow. New perspectives are gained, old patterns are understood and released, and a more authentic sense of self starts to solidify. This is not a passive process. It requires the endurance Jung spoke of, the willingness to stay with the discomfort and the uncertainty. But the gold that alchemy promises is not material wealth, but psychological richness, a deeper connection to what Jung called the self, the ordering principle of the psyche, the totality of our being. How might you create your own psychological crucible? What forms of solitude, even brief ones, could allow the alchemical fire of transformation to do its work within you, turning the lead of unconscious reactivity into the gold of conscious selfhood? As you begin to shed the persona of constant availability and set new boundaries, embarking on your path of individuation, it's almost inevitable that you will encounter resistance from the external world. This isn't necessarily malicious. It's often a natural reaction to a shift in the established dynamics of your relationships and social systems. Jung understood that the individual's journey towards wholeness often stands in tension with the collective. In The Undiscovered Self, he wrote, "The individual is the only reality. The further we move away from the individual towards the aggregate, the more we move towards statistics where the individual is lost. When you start prioritizing your individual needs and your inner world, you may disrupt the collective's expectations of you. People who have become accustomed to your constant availability may feel confused, inconvenienced, or even personally rejected when you begin to say no or become less accessible. They might unconsciously, or sometimes consciously, try to pull you back into your old role. This resistance can manifest in various ways: guilt-tripping, "But you always used to help me with this," passive aggression, direct criticism, "You've become so selfish lately," or even attempts to undermine your newfound resolve. For example, a family member who relied on you to solve all their problems might express bewilderment or anger when you suggest they find their own solutions. Colleagues who benefited from your tendency to take on extra work might subtly pressure you to revert to your old patterns. Navigating this collective resistance requires courage, clarity, and a firm grounding in your own individuation process. It's here that the inner work you've done, understanding your persona, confronting your shadow, connecting with your anima animus, and embracing solitude for transformation, becomes your anchor. Jung emphasized the importance of consciousness by understanding that these reactions are often less about you personally and more about the disruption of a system. You can respond with greater compassion and less reactivity. This doesn't mean caving in to the pressure. Instead, it means calmly and consistently upholding your boundaries, perhaps explaining your needs if appropriate, but not over-justifying or apologizing for your growth. Remember that the resistance you face can also be a powerful mirror, reflecting back to you the strength of your old patterns and the areas where your resolve is still being tested. Jung saw such challenges not as setbacks, but as opportunities for further differentiation and strengthening of the self. As you navigate these external reactions, you are not just protecting your newfound inner space, you are also modeling a different way of being, one that might in time inspire others to embark on their own journeys of self-discovery. The path of individuation is rarely easy, and it often involves standing apart from the crowd, at least for a time. But as Jung's work powerfully suggests, it is the path towards becoming who you are truly meant to be. How can you meet the inevitable resistance with both firmness in your boundaries and compassion for those who are still adjusting to the authentic you that is emerging? We've journeyed through some of Carl Jung's most transformative ideas, exploring how the seemingly simple act of withdrawing constant availability can indeed change everything. We've seen how the persona, our social mask, can trap us in exhausting roles, and how the courageous path of individuation calls us to set boundaries not as acts of exclusion but as declarations of selfhood. By daring to look into our shadow, we uncover the unconscious roots of people-pleasing, and by fostering a conscious relationship with our inner anima or animus, we pave the way for more authentic connections. The solitude born from intentional unavailability becomes a crucible for psychological alchemy, transforming the lead of our unexamined life into the gold of self-awareness. And yes, we acknowledged the collective resistance that may arise, yet even this can be navigated with consciousness and serve to strengthen our resolve. This journey, as Jung's work illuminates, is not about becoming isolated or uncaring, quite the opposite. It's about cultivating a deep, unshakable connection with your true self, so that when you do choose to be available, it is from a place of genuine presence, strength, and wholeness, rather than from obligation or unconscious compulsion. Jung once remarked, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." Choosing to reclaim your time, your energy, your inner space is a profound act of becoming. It is choosing to honor the unique individual you are, and in doing so, you not only transform your own life but also subtly shift the energetic landscape around you, perhaps inviting others to consider their own masks and their own paths to authenticity. The world doesn't need more people stretched thin by constant demands. It needs more individuals who are deeply rooted, consciously aware, and authentically themselves. By stopping being perpetually available to the outer world, you open the door to becoming profoundly available to your own soul, and that, as Jung might agree, is where true life begins.